Hi guys, Brandon Faust here with Mold Solutions USA, and today I'm here with Hayley Imbriani. She's a friend of mine, and she is also a clinician in nutrition response testing, and she helps a lot of patients here in Tampa Bay. So thank you so much for joining us today, Hayley.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know that she trained at one of the more prestigious schools for nutrition response training, right? And you're helping a lot of people in the area here in Tampa Bay.
Yeah,
Right.
I have a lot of people with nutrition response testing, and I did train right in Clearwater.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, it's interesting. I really wanted to sit down and talk with you because I know that you have your own story, right, when it comes to mold, right, similar to myself.
Yeah.
And I find that those people that are helping others with that sort of journey, if you want to call it, or solving the problem of mold toxicity, mold sensitivity, if they've had their own scenario or run in with it, they understand it at a deeper level, right?
Yeah.
So, could you talk to me? Just tell me a little bit about what you've experienced and what you did to solve it.
Well, for my personal story, for me, I remember we had just moved into a new apartment.
Yeah.
And when we moved in, we didn't know that there was mold or anything. We didn't even suspect it. And then just a week of me being there, I went from just being like my normal self to like I couldn't breathe. I even started having asthma attacks. I never had asthma attacks. Like
Wow.
that was not a condition that I had.
Wow.
And I had to go to the doctor. They gave me an inhaler. And
Wow.
even when I used the inhaler, it didn't help because it just wasn't really the actual problem. And I remember the worst was when I was driving home. And like one of the big things that hit me the most was the fatigue. Like it would just, because you can't get oxygen in. If you can't breathe, you're going to go into a state where all you want to do is sleep. All you want to do is rest because activity, you need oxygen to do it.
Correct.
And so for me, I was driving home and I started to drift asleep at the wheel. I actually had to pull over to the side of the road and I passed out in my car.
Wow.
And I woke up and I was just like wheezing and trying to breathe and get oxygen in. And that's when it really hit me that there was a problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think it was at that point that you reached out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure we were able to help you.
Yeah, we found out that like when you guys came, you found out that all our windows were actually lined with mold.
Yeah.
And it was like old windows that they couldn't even open. It was like a fire hazard.
Right.
And before, when we found out there was mold, like we did try and get the the landlord to help us, but all they did was spray.
Right.
And they sprayed with a toxic chemical, and we couldn't even open the windows to air it out because the windows were sealed shut.
And this is a story that honestly I've heard so many times, which is really unfortunate. I know this was, I think we're at like 4 years ago at this point in time, So, but I remember, that there was quite a bit of growth around those windows, and probably had to do with the condensation, right, and water buildup, and then, so.
Another thing too that people might not think to notice is like the reaction of your pets, your animals, because not only was I affected, but my cats were too.
Right.
Like I could tell that there was a difference in them because cats, like they're lazy and they lay about, but like my cat was playful. He was like running around and active all the time. And then when we moved, I could tell there was a difference in his personality. He was just a lot more tired and he was really dragging and his eyes were watering where they weren't doing that before.
Wow.
And then my other cat, she got this really bad skin reaction. She started getting rash all over her body.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that before too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you're pointing out, which is totally accurate, and just one of those, there's a few things. One, that without oxygen, right, obviously the body has a very difficult time operating, but in the presence of high oxygen, disease doesn't exist. So I believe that the corollary would also be true, that if you had low levels of oxygen, your body would be more prone to disease.
Yeah.
Right, and inflammation.
And I do see that a lot with my patients.
Right.
A lot of my patients who come in, I see like all these different things that occur. And I see that, but also food sensitivity is another one that you might not really expect with the mold issue.
Right.
But when someone has something that is affecting their body to such a level, where it is causing the organs to not do their normal operation, interfering with digestion, interfering with any action that the body normally does. Everything is going to be so much harder.
It's going to get thrown off.
Yeah, so people can develop food sensitivities by being exposed to things that are toxic to them. So breathing in something toxic like mold will have an impact on their digestion, on a lot of different processes in the human body.
And you don't always know exactly which one it's going to impact for that particular patient.
Well, it can be a neurotoxin. You're
Right.
inhaling it, you're breathing it in, it can affect your brain. It can affect a lot of different things.
Right.
And then one of the things that helps me identify is with my patients, I kind of ask them the question, I'm like, okay, so when do you feel worse? When do you feel better? Do you feel worse when you're in your house or outside of your house? And most of the time, if mold is in the home, they'll tell me, I feel worse in the home, or it acts up more at nighttime, or they feel it more in the morning after they've been sleeping in it all night.
Makes total sense.
So those are all indicators for me.
Right. Because, I mean, the thing is, mold can basically be in so many different places, and there's so many different types of mold. But realistically, the ones that I'm seeing the most are the cladosporium mold, which is prevalent in the AC system and in the ducts. It can develop due to the condensation from the coils, also the duct sweating. So there's moisture buildup there. And then it also can get built up on the blower wheel. And when that's happening, it's being distributed throughout the rest of the home. And from my training, that's an allergenic mold. So it's going to move into the body as a foreign invader, and then the body will produce histamines at a more rapid rate to fight it off. But that's when you start getting that swelling, similar to like getting stung by a bee or bit by a mosquito. You get some swelling that takes place. So that's your allergenic mold, the cladosporium. Then there's the category of pathogenic molds. Mainly, one of the worst is actually Aspergillus. It's classified as a pathogenic mold, but I feel that the sort of gap between pathogenic and toxic is pretty close. Because realistically, if it's releasing a gas and it can cause severe disease, then I mean it's pretty toxic. If you ask me. But that is a humidity-driven mold mainly. It also can come through a water intrusion issue. And then the other one that is the most known about is black mold, or Stachybotrys is the technical term for it, which is usually coming from some sort of water intrusion issue or a leak. And that is releasing a gas that can be pretty fatal. And in actual fact, that mold in particular was harvested in the Persian Gulf War and used as a biological weapon, right? So the gas was extracted and then used, as chemical warfare.
And I've actually had patients who we found out were exposed to black mold, like the more that I worked with them, and then they would describe it. And then when they handled it, their health changed drastically.
Right,
Like,
it's
it
not
was
even
like-
a small amount. It's true.
It was just like a night and day difference.
Right.
It was huge, like what changed with them, because they were breathing in something that was killing them. They didn't know it.
Yes, and I mean, I had no idea when I got into the industry how much of an impact it would have, not only on my life, on my son's life at a month old, but also on the various clients that we're helping, to ensure that that their exposure is dramatically reduced by actually removing the thing that's causing the toxicity in the first place.
And it's really important that people know about this, because like a lot of people, whenever I approach mold with them, the first reaction is, oh, we're in Florida.
I know, they just completely blow it
it's
off.
like,
right?
yeah, we're in Florida, but it doesn't mean you're immune to like the reaction of it. So you still have to handle it. It's still something you have to defend yourself against.
Yeah, that's the first thing I was hearing about. Oh yeah, that's common. Even the cladosporium, oh that's common. Just because it's common doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay, right?
No.
And it's still something that can be causing very serious physical issues.
Like common is not normal.
No, that doesn't mean, it's not like the ideal scene. It's not like the way it should be. So if you do have that, you want to address it. And unfortunately, I think that part of that stems from, in some arenas, mold can be one of the worst four-letter words in the English dictionary. They do not want to hear MOLD. They don't want to hear the word mold because it means liability, it means expense, it means so many things that, and unfortunately there is that enters into it where it's almost kind of made less of, oh, don't worry about it. That's just that old Florida smell. Well, that old Florida smell is a musty smell. And if it's musty, it's usually moldy. So you want to find the actual source. You got to find what's causing it, so that living in the home isn't a dangerous activity.
And a lot of people aren't educated to even identify it. Like I've had patients who would tell me, like, yeah, I have this black stuff growing on my wall, and I'm like, oh,
tell me about that.
Okay, that's actually something you need to be concerned about.
100%. I've also had clients that are like, no, we don't have mold here, and within 5 minutes. I found mold in 4 or 5 different places, just kind of looking. I'm looking in the vents, I'm looking in the window seals, I'm looking under the sinks, I'm looking on the walls, I'm looking, at the bottom of furniture where they just don't see it. They don't know what to look for, right? Or they think that it's only, because of a nasty leak. No, there's so many things that can cause it.
And then one of my more interesting cases, she came in and I knew that she was dealing with mold just because when she entered my room, I started scratching.
Wow.
And I was itchy, and she had these rashes all over her skin, all on the surface of her skin.
Wow.
And when I did the muscle testing, I started getting the rashes and it spread to me.
Wow.
So I had to do fast action for myself to take care of that so it didn't stay on me. But some people can even have it on them and carry it with them.
100%. I mean, well, if they're in a moldy environment, if you have a home that, let's say you're at 10,000 Aspergillus penicillium per cubic meter, which is relatively high. Well, that's 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. That's how many spores are in that space.
Jeez.
So if that's on your clothes, if that's on your person, you can bring it into other places. And if you have somebody who's sensitive, they can react. So even old furniture, you can buy old furniture and then bring it into a home and it can cross-contaminate.
And I've had that happen with my patients where they would move from where they had mold to a place that didn't, but because it was on their furniture, it would contaminate.
Completely. And we actually just treated a lady who moved into a brand new condo, like a multi-million-dollar condo. And she was still reacting. She moved out of a place that had mold, but she didn't think with the fact that, oh, I might be bringing mold into this new condo. So she's still reacting.
I think we're talking about the same person.
Potentially, right? There's a potential, right? So that's exactly right,
Yeah.
Okay, so it is the same person. So, so that's exactly right. So that can happen. And it is one of those things that, they just need to be made aware of it. And once you actually address that, you can see some real positive change once you've made the environment free and clear of toxicity. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it really is such a drastic change. For me, even when we changed the environment, I felt a difference just going into my home.
Yes.
I inhaled and I was I could actually feel that I was getting more oxygen into my body.
After we treated your place?
After you treated the place. Because before, I didn't realize how heavy the air was.
Yes.
I didn't realize it until I walked in and then it wasn't there.
Yes.
And it actually is this physical, presence, almost like a heavy blanket.
Yes.
Just you can really feel it.
No, that change in the environment is pretty amazing.
And then now I feel I can identify when it's around just because I know what it was like.
Yeah, the difference, right? Between.
So if it's around, I can kind of feel there's definitely something here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that, I really enjoy about my job, and the reason it's such an important, aspect of my life. It's not just a job for me. It's really a mission or a purpose to ensure that people have incredible air quality, and to sort of help educate people in regards to the actual problems that it can bring, because there is such a lack of awareness, like you're talking about, where people just don't know. And it can cause such a diverse host of problems. It's so many different physical issues. It's not there's one thing. It could be headaches, joint aches, respiratory issues, rashes, gut issues, stuff on the feet, stuff on the chest, pain in the chest,
Things you don't really expect or attribute to mold.
Exactly.
But anyone who's had, one thing that I noticed too is people who've had bad conditions for a long time, and no matter what they do, they can eat better, they can make better choices, they can take supplements, they can do chiropractic, they can do a bunch of different things, but their health just kind of stays the same.
Right.
I've seen that where they're just in a really toxic environment and things won't change for the better until they improve the environment that they're in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's exactly why Mold Solutions USA exists, is so that we can help with that. We really enjoy helping people that have issues, so we're glad that we can also help our friends in the healthcare industry, right, with that.
Yeah.
So in terms of recommendations, in terms of working with a company like ours or anything like that, is there anything that you could say, tell the audience or tell the guys watching this video what to expect, or sort of what you went through in terms of your own recommendations?
Oh, as far as
working with a company like Mold Solutions USA,
okay.
right? Is there anything that you could say to that?
Well, I would say that with working with you, they could expect to have good quality service. As far as when you get rid of the mold, you're doing it in a way that is healthy for them. You're not using toxic chemicals,
right,
and you're not suppressing mold. You're actually handling it, so it will be alleviated.
Yeah.
And you guys are doing it in a way that's ethical. So you're not just making a mess and moving spores around and leaving a toxic area for them to come back to. You're handling it. Because there's people that will say, oh yeah, we handled the mold, but all they did was spray it with something toxic, and then now there's all these spores moving around the house, and it's worse for the people when they come back into their home.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Or if they just do air duct cleaning.
That's also correct.
And then they just clean, and then you have all these loose spores that are now circulating in the environment.
That's a totally correct statement.
And then one thing that sets you guys apart is that you do care about educating. You want people to know. That's how you know that someone really cares, is because they'll educate you.
Right.
People that don't really care, they'll be like, oh yeah, just do this.
Yeah.
And they might not give you solutions or tell you what you need to do.
Right.
So you guys actually do that, and you educate people.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And honestly, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and talk to us about it.
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask you guys.
Yeah, sure.
As far as things that people can do after you take care of the environment, what are some things that they can do to help with preventing or at least limiting the spread of future mold?
Sure. So the step would basically be, one, finding out that yes, there is a situation. 2, locating the source of the problem. Where is it actually coming from? Mm-hmm. 3, determining is it surface or is it actually impacting the material? And that would play a role in deciding whether or not you should eliminate the contaminated material, or you can actually do a surface cleaning. In some cases, you might have to remove the porous material, also depending on how prevalent it is and how sensitive the client is. And then you would go through a full either remediation process where you're removing the contaminated material, or a full micro cleaning where you're doing the HEPA vacuuming, and also the wipe down. So you do high efficiency particulate air filtration, and then also doing the wipe down. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I always recommend doing that full, atomized sanitization process, where you're addressing the actual air quality, and you're not just kind of spraying it with a fogger, but you're filling the entire volume of the space with a non-toxic product that will actually eliminate mold spores and reduce the mycotoxin level. And by reducing the colonized mold, you also are eliminating that thing which will contribute to producing mycotoxins. So through thorough cleaning, you can get that to a very low level of mycotoxin exposure. And then after you've done that process, and you've either put it all back together again, or you've kind of tested as a cleared space, right? You've gotten the clearance tests. Then to answer your exact question, the preventative measures would be, yes, there are purification systems that you can plug into either the AC unit itself. UV lights are actually something that initially I didn't think were a major contributor, but I have found to be absolutely beneficial in combination with the
Mhm.
purifying. So I would put the UV light next to the blower wheel,
Mhm.
right? That helps to prevent mold from growing on the actual unit itself, the air handler that is, distributing that cold air throughout the house. I saw one home that had 5 AC systems. 3 had a UV light, 2 did not.
Oh, wow.
The 2 that did not, after 2.5 years, were completely contaminated and were contaminating the rest of the house. So at that point in time, I became a firm believer in having the UV light next to the blower wheel. And then the other thing that you want to watch for is humidity. You want to keep that humidity level below 60%. It can go up to 65 and then you dry it out, but
And since you guys helped us, we actually, because you told us that, we got a dehumidifier.
Right.
And then we have the little things that track like where it's at in the house.
Exactly.
So we pay attention to that.
Yeah, so the humidity levels. And then there's also different purification systems. Obviously there's like filters, but then there's a more proactive system that we also distribute, which has UV, ozone, ionization. So it's a combination of technologies, low levels of ozone that are safe for the home, but you could put it on like an ozone blast. So once you're going to leave, you can put it on for 2 hours or 4 hours, and then also help to purify that air. So once you've done the treatment, that's a great way to keep those levels down so that you are mitigating exposure to mold spores and ultrafine particles.
And was there a certain temperature that was good to keep like the AC at? Or?
Absolutely. So in the wintertime, you really want to be between like 70 and 73, mainly because you don't want there to be, you want your AC to kick on at least once a day. The AC has a couple functions. One is to climatize the air, and the other is to pull water out of the air. So when the AC kicks on, the condensation coils kick on, and they get cold enough that they actually attract water droplets, and that condensation, helps to pull, water from the air, so it makes the air drier. Also, you can turn, in the winter, you could have the heater on too. But most importantly is during the summertime, you don't really want to go lower than like 75, believe it or not. You don't want to kick it to 69 because your ducts will sweat. The closet that your AC is in can start sweating and developing mold. There's a number of things that can happen from condensation if you put it too cold. The other thing is you don't want it too high. So between like 75 and 78 is really the kind of the sweet spot. If you go up to like 80, 81, now your humidity level is going over 60% for a long period of time. And if it hits 70, now you're like in ideal growth stages. That's where the mold is really going to start taking off on all surfaces. And the way that happens is the materials in the home start getting wet enough that the dust and other particles that have settled, it creates what's called a biofilm, and when a spore lands on that, it will actually start growing. So you can actually get mold growing on glass. You can get mold growing on non-porous surfaces, and most people don't think that's possible. They think it's just organic material, but no. If the conditions are right, you can have a full mold bloom in the entire home. So yeah, those are, it depends on really the atmosphere outside where you want to have your AC on inside. But so broad answer is between 70 and 73 in the wintertime, and between 75 and 78 in the summertime. And we don't really have a lot of spring in Florida, but there's sometimes
kind of mixed.
yeah, spring and fall is very short-lived, but you can. One other thing that people should know is that if it is drier and cooler outside, that's the time to open your windows, right? Because then that sort of damp, more humid air is going to move towards cool and dry, right? Yeah, but if it is wet and hot outside and you open your windows, it's going to come into your home if it's cooler and drier. So yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, that's all part of the education process, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So again, thanks for taking the time, Hayley.
Thank you.